talk about the issue of misleading advertisements and the new guidelines which have been brought in. Now, aiming to curb the misleading advertisements and protect the consumers' rights who may be exploited or affected by such advertisements, the Central Consumer Protection Authority under the Department of Consumer Affairs has notified guidelines for prevention of misleading advertisements and endorsement for misleading advertisements. Now, these guidelines seek to ensure that consumers are not being fooled with unsubstantiated claims, exaggerated promises, misinformation, and false claims as well. These guidelines define bait advertisement, surrogate advertisement, and clearly provide what constitutes as free claim advertisements. Perspective provisions have also been laid down on advertisements targeting children. Clear guidelines have also been put in place for duties of manufacturer, service provider, advertiser, and advertising agency, along with penalties for violation of these guidelines. Today, we'll discuss and analyze these new norms and their impact and significance as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Ms. Nidhi Khare, who's joining us. She is the Additional Secretary in the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Chairperson of CCPA as well. We're also joined by Ms. Manisha Kapoor, CEO of Advertising Standards Council of India, and Mr. Sanjay Chadha, consumer activist and senior advocate of Supreme Court, is also with us. Welcome all of you to SANSAD Television. I'd like to join with you, start with you rather, Ms. Khare, because you're the chairperson of CCPA, and we would like to know a little bit more in detail about these guidelines. But first, let's begin with the why. As in, what was the need to bring in such detailed guidelines vis-a-vis these aspects? And are these not aspects not covered under the existing rules?
So when the new Consumer Protection Act 2019 was notified in July 2020, we were in the midst of COVID pandemic. And suddenly we noticed that nearly every manufacturer or seller started claiming that its product was essentially providing protection from COVID. This was a clear case of exploiting very, very heightened consumers' sensitivity towards the disease and the pandemic. And we felt that something needs to be done. Now, already there were very clear provisions under the Act as to what were misleading advertisements. A misleading advertisement is something which describes a product or the service falsely, or it gives a false guarantee, or in case it makes such implied expressions which constitute unfair trade practice, or it conceals very, very important information from the consumer.
Okay.
And we found that all these four violations were being made by all kinds of products, whether you purchased mattresses, there were shirts, there were fabrics, there were wall paints, all kinds of products were mysteriously, they were all claiming protection from COVID pandemic. So definitely we issued notices to all these companies, and 14 such cases were reported. We ordered for their discontinuation of misleading advertisements, but we realized that there must be a guidelines for this sector, because the advertisers, the manufacturers, advertising agencies, the service providers, the endorsers, everybody needs, something in black and white, wherein they can also study for themselves as to what is a valid advertisement and what would constitute a misleading advertisement. We understand that it takes a lot of time for ideation, creation, and there is a marketing team which actually looks into making sure that any advertisement becomes successful with people. But then if there will be a guideline, then probably the industry would also find it useful, and the endorsers would also find it relevant before making any commitments to such advertisements.
Okay. Okay. Now, there seems to be a lot of focus, Ms. Khare, when we go through these norms, there seems to be a lot of focus on various aspects. For example, disclaimer is one very important aspect in any advertisement. Then, the advertisements which are more focused on children, there, the CCPA and these guidelines seems to have put a lot of light there. Now, if you could make us understand why behind these aspects and how will it prevent? Because, disclaimer, of course, we can hear the disclaimers as of now as well in most of the ads.
Exactly. So what is happening is that during the pandemic lockdown, we saw that there is a surge in e-commerce trading, which means more and more people started using digital platforms, and electronically also things were started getting purchased and they were sold. Now, what is happening is that while people may try to attract consumers by claiming that a particular item is free, or a particular item is, they may be making a claim, but then in very small font size or very hushed up or very, speedy voiceover, they will make the disclaimer that, for any further details, please look into, on our website or things like that. Now, which is not correct. We also saw that while the advertisement was made in, say, Hindi or in regional languages, but then all the content in disclaimer was being showed in English. Now, again, this is not correct. So in the guidelines, we've made it very clear that not only will your disclaimer not be in contradiction to the claim that you are making in the main body of your advertisement, it cannot, if you are making a false or misleading claim about your product, in the disclaimer, you cannot say that this is just a creation or this is just a creative freedom, or you cannot, try to hush that up in the disclaimer.
Okay.
Together, we have also asked them that the disclaimer should also be in the same font size. It should be also prominently placed, and the voiceover should be in the same speed as the claim was made. And then the language has to be the same in which the main advertisement has been made.
Okay. Okay, and the most significant aspect of these guidelines is vis-a-vis children, because therein there's a lot of focus in terms of what can be endorsed, what cannot be endorsed, and what constitutes misleading advertisement, which are focused on children.
Absolutely. So children is also another sector which the advertising agencies feel, and perhaps it is also being taught that women and children-centric advertisements catch maximum attention. So we have also come out with these guidelines because there were none, existing. So what was happening was that all kinds of, false information was being thrown in the name of advertisements for a product, wherein they were also citing, for example, the nutritional value is much higher than the traditional food, for example, of their product. Similarly, in channels which are meant for children, or in a channel where children's program are being broadcast, we have said that such advertisements should not be, they should not be broadcast.
Okay.
So these are very clear signs. For example, junk food taking or say replacing traditional nutritious food. That should not be done, because again, it actually makes since the children are they are not able to judge properly and they are too small to actually make wise judgments.
Okay.
So most of the times, we feel that children are being misled by such harsh advertising capacities.
Okay, indeed. And children are the most impressionable section of the society when we're talking about advertisements there. Let me bring in the industry perspective also, now that we have a clear understanding of what the new guidelines are and where the focus areas are. Ms. Manisha Kapoor, from the industry's point of view, if we have to understand two things. One is why the industry was not able to, self-regulate itself when we're talking about misleading advertisements to such a greater extent, and two, now that the new guidelines are in place, now, how much do you believe the kind of change which we might see in the immediate future? Of course, there are penalties being put in place as well.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things. One is that self-regulation is usually the first line of defense when it comes to consumer protection, because in any case, corrective action taken is always always needs to be there. But if one can do preventive education kind of aspects, I think that is a win-win situation for everyone. So I think when it comes to responsible advertisers, so what this bringing this notification does is actually it creates a level playing field for all advertisers who want to be honest and who want to make sure that their advertising is fair to consumers. So I think the coming of these guidelines is very, very welcome. It also brings a lot of clarity because advertising is a very subjective matter. So I think the clearer guidelines that are in place, it informs the advertisers as to what is permissible and what is not. So I think that's a very useful thing in terms of having this. I think in terms of self-regulation, the guidelines have been there for a while. And I think, it's also a matter of, further development of these guidelines, because advertising is a very, very dynamic kind of space right now, and especially with digital. So I think these are things which will evolve over a period of time. But I think for right now, the clarity that has been provided through these guidelines is extremely welcome.
Okay. Ms. Kapoor, two aspects here when we look at these guidelines, and we would like to understand, the impact on vis-a-vis those two aspects. One, in terms of the target audience, that is children, as Ms. Khare was pointing out in a lot of detail as to what has been done. And second, in terms of, one of the stakeholders, that is endorsers, endorsers have been put in focus here, and there have been penalties also which have been put in place in case it's the first offense, they'll be prohibited for 1 year. In case of subsequent offense, they'll be prohibited for 3 years. So how would that impact the advertising industry and the way the advertising industry works from here onwards, both from the target audience point of view and from one of the stakeholders point of view?
Yeah, so I think, if I speak of, let's say, the guidelines that ASCI has had for a few years now, I think they cover these points in terms of, with children. I mean, we have it under a chapter which is called harmful, because we feel that, products or advertising like this can cause harm to children. As well as, I think the endorsers, there is again a very clear guideline which says that, endorsers must do their due diligence before they are able to kind of, sell these products. I think what difference it will make now is that there is a much stronger deterrent present by way of the CCPA guidelines. And I think that deterrent, and I'm sure it will be applied strongly, I think makes the difference in terms of, the guidelines that have come in. And I think these are the 2 points which you rightly said. I think guidelines have existed, but I think it's the penalties, it is the demonstrative effect that the CCPA can bring in, which really strengthens all of these guidelines and makes it transparent for even advertisers, endorsers to know, what are their rights, but also what are their responsibilities under the Act.
Okay, demonstrative effect is the correct way to put it out there to ensure that all the stakeholders and the end consumer also is aware as to what is there in the public domain and how can it be utilized. Mr. Chadha, I'd like to bring you in here, and let's also look at it from the consumer's perspective. Most of the time the complaints are that the consumers are taken for a ride by the advertisers, by the manufacturers and by the endorsers as well. How would you look at these guidelines? Do you believe this will put a stop mostly to that consumers' problem?
Certainly, it is one of the milestones, if I must say. The major problem which the consumers of this country are facing is something is shown and something is given. You are showing something and something else is given to you. The most important element when this law 2020, I remember the date, 20th July 2020, when this law, Consumer Protection Act, the new one, came into force, the most important element of that was where CCPA was formed. And we are very, I'm very glad to meet Nidhi ji. She is the one who's superheading it. I wanted to tell you this particular body, which has a very, very important role. The law itself provides for it. Section 10 is there, under which this is formed, and a very, very powerful. It is the watchdog for each and every consumer. They are the one. They have got the power to investigate, to suo moto take actions against such people who give this kind of misleading advertisement. And what is the key which I just heard, Nidhi ji, and you been talking about it, that in the new advertisement guidelines which are being given, the vulnerable section, the children, the people who get very quickly influenced. Very rightly she said, when we were talking about, that entire thing is given and later on it is written that please go to our website and see the rest of the things. So why? Now, educated, we have to see the objective of the Act of Act 2019 Act is that once your consumer is educated, strengthened, he is strong enough, and then only he will be protected from all this kind of misleading things which happen for him. So this is one of the most important steps, what I feel, Vijay. And, smaller things have been covered now. Of course, we all are aware that Advertising Standard Council of India is already existing. That is there. They have their own guidelines. Manisha said that we have certain things which we have to follow all the way. These are the harmful things which
self-regulatory mechanism.
Yeah, those things are there. And now with coming into these new guidelines given by CCPA, I think this will work as a deterrent for those people who are involved in this kind of activities. And one last very important point is a heavy penalty which is imposed. You told that he will be barred, such person. I say that first penalty is 10 lakh rupees and it can go up to 50 lakh rupees. So deterrent is there. I think this is a very, very welcome step and a very strong step.
Okay, Ms. Kare, another aspect, as Mr. Chadha is pointing out, of course, these guidelines are exhaustive enough, and for the demonstrative effect, as Ms. Kapoor was referring to, in terms of all stakeholders here. One very important stakeholder in the entire business is, of course, a consumer, for whom, this all is being put in place. Now, consumer awareness is equally important as, the awareness of all these other stakeholders. The laws or the guidelines are put in place. The stakeholders like the advertisers, manufacturers, endorsers, they are made aware of it. Of course, they are, bound to follow it, these guidelines. But in terms of consumers, they also need to be made aware. So what's the plan vis-a-vis the government or the ministry, that the consumer should be made aware that they can go ahead and cross-check and find out and perhaps, lodge a complaint if at all they feel they've been cheated?
I think action speaks, the loudest. So over the past 1.5 years, since CCPA started functioning on 24th July 2020, we've taken many action against very, very, prominent, say, brands, commercial products. For example, we've taken action against Naptol, which is a very prominent teleshopping, brand. We've taken action against Sensodyne. We've taken action against Sure Vision India, which was selling, some kind of a concoction, claiming that it would restore eyesight. So far, we have issued about more than 100 notices, and they are, of course, they comprise of both unfair trade practice as well as misleading advertisement. So what is happening is that we are also flooded with all kinds of information from, say, Jagruk Grahak. We are campaigning that any person who feels that it is a misleading, it's a case of misleading advertisement or a falsification of claims, then they should immediately contact the National Consumer Helpline, whose number is 1915. And they should lodge their complaints there. CCPA is taking note of all such complaints, and that is the basis of our class action also. Just as Mr. Chadha said that CCPA can take suo motu action. Now, all our suo motu actions are actually based on similar complaints that we are receiving on the National Consumer Helpline. So this makes us also very sure-footed.
Okay.
We are issuing notices, and we'll be taking in a very big way what are the components of this guidelines to the consumers on say using all the social media, trying to rope in as many as say bloggers or influencers to write about it. Also educate the consumers in a big way as to what is a valid advertisement and what is a misleading advertisement.
Okay, okay. Ms. Kapoor, concluding comments from you in terms of, of course, the industry has welcomed these guidelines, and there were already self-regulatory, processes which were in place. But two aspects here before we bring this discussion to an end. One is what the industry needs to do, and two, what is it that the industry expects from the government and specifically the regulator here, the CCPA?
Sure. I think what the industry needs to do certainly is to be careful and to make sure that they go through a process of due diligence to seek if required external advice before their campaigns are launched. Because earlier while ASCI was asking for voluntary compliance, now today there can be a penalty for someone who does not comply. So certainly the stakes are higher, and therefore I think companies need to be much more careful, much more prudent in terms of their advertising approaches. So I think that is certainly one thing. And I think a lot of companies do have strong internal processes, but they need to possibly be strengthened, and to I think do as much due diligence perhaps with consumer testing or seeking expert advice, etc., before the ad is actually launched. Because to my mind, the guidelines would be extremely successful if we can prevent people from coming up with misleading ads. So while the corrective action is there, I think the best situation for the consumer is that such ads don't reach the market in the first place. So I think that is something that the industry should focus on. I think the second thing in terms of what the industry expects, I believe, over the next few weeks, there may be some questions and clarifications once the guidelines come in, as applied to certain situations or certain ads, what is the interpretation of these guidelines. And I'm sure, we will be reaching out to the CCPA industry, perhaps with its other forums would also reach out to perhaps understand, certain clarifications with respect to certain aspects, etc. Because a guideline by its nature will be a little bit more general, and in specific situations, how
Indeed.
should you interpret that? So I think that's a dialogue of an adjustment period, so to say, where the industry gets more and more familiar with that and understands exactly what is the intent of the guideline in particular cases. So I think that dialogue will perhaps be active for the next few weeks as the industry digests these guidelines. But I think overall the industry is quite geared, to these guidelines. And as I said now, with the coming in of the deterrents, we hope that people do, become even more responsible now.
Okay, okay, indeed, there it is. Thank you so much, Ms. Manisha Kapoor, Ms. Nidhi Khare, and Mr. Chadha as well for sharing your views and insight with us and our viewers here on this very important aspect, that is how to deal with misleading advertisements and new guidelines, new norms which have been put in place by the government. The CCPA has come out with those guidelines, clearly define what a misleading advertisement is, and also aimed at protecting the consumer's interest more so to a vulnerable section of the society, more impressionable section of the society, that is children, and for all the stakeholders